Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Durst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Ginny Clarke, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of People in Transition. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Bob, thanks so much for having me. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Jenny, when you were younger, what did you want to be when you, and I'm doing air quotes here, grew up?
It's so funny. I actually found a report that I had to do for school, and there were three things that I wanted to be. That was the assignment. We could pick three things, and I found it, complete with the construction paper cover and back, that kind of thing. And one was a model, because I'm 6 feet tall, and people used to say you should be a model. It shows how impressionable we are, right? About listening to what other people have to say. The other was an orthopedic surgeon, because my mother was a physical therapist. Her whole family was in the medical profession, doctors, nurses, a whole bit. And listening to her talk about the advances in orthopedic surgery, I thought were pretty fascinating. So that was one. And then the one that I actually started to pursue was being a veterinarian, because I loved animals. So I ended up going to UC Davis to study animal science when I went off to college, only to graduate in French linguistics. So I'll stop there, and we can connect the dots from there.
Jenny, what were the transition moments that occurred to get you from that picture of yourself as that young child to where you are at today? You're really none of those three things. So how did that journey go?
Yeah, well, to indulge the passion for animals, I did do sort of an unpaid internship in a veterinary hospital for a little while. And when I got to UC Davis, I realized, I kind of looked around, and I really felt out of place. I think that was the first signal. So aside from studying, chemistry and the math and science and all that, that wasn't the issue for me. I could get through those courses. But when it came to the animal science, I saw all these people who had been in FFA, Future Farmers of America, they lived on farms. I had just wanted to be a, sort of suburban veterinarian working with puppies and kittens. And so I just made that hard call and said, this is not what I'm destined for. And my parents, frankly, were completely supportive. And they said, well, what do you love to do? And I had studied French all through high school. I had an amazing French teacher who inspired me. And I thought, well, I'm going to study French because I've always loved it. I love the language. I'd become fluent. I'm not anymore. And I literally flipped through the catalog to see what else can I major in to sort of fortify that. And I picked linguistics. And in hindsight now, linguistics really appealed to me and taught me how to think, because it's a system. It's apparently in parts of the UK, it's in the math department because it is such a system. So that was the first thing, was to get those 2 degrees. And back then, this is the 80s, and I was quite comfortable with what they used to refer to as a liberal arts degree, because back then you could do lots of different things with that liberal arts degree. I was okay doing that. Meanwhile, on campus, I was very active as a peer advisor and counselor. I did a stint as one of 2 special assistants to the chancellor. So I got exposure to the world of management. And when I graduated, I was a recruiter for the University of California. And that was a great experience. And it leveraged a lot of the things that I had been doing on campus. And I kind of thought I might want to go on and get a master's in higher ed administration. And then I decided, no, I'm going to go for an MBA, because the management piece aside, I'd not been exposed to the business world, but the management piece felt very natural for me. So I went to Kellogg. I applied, I picked up and left Northern California and moved to Chicago and went to Northwestern's Kellogg School. And from there, I did lots of different things, and I'm happy to talk more about that. But that was the big series of transitions away from that sort of starry-eyed aspiration to a more practical, at least disciplined course of study.
And Jenny, maybe for those 3 listeners that we have that don't know you, why don't you give just a little insights in terms of why you are equipped to be able to speak about people that are changing jobs and transition management?
Since then, I've had so many other years, 30 years of experience. And so when I graduated from Kellogg, I went into financial services. And by the way, while I was at Kellogg, I was on their admissions committee and worked in their admissions office. And this was obviously a follow-on to having been a college recruiter for UC Davis. And they actually offered me a job in their admissions office when I graduated. I said, oh, heavens no, I got my MBA. I have to go into business. And I'm glad I did. I'm still very loyal to Kellogg, very active there. But I ended up going into banking. I got exposure to real estate while I was there. And I pivoted after a couple of years, from banking at what's now called Chase into commercial real estate. I went to Jones Lang LaSalle. It was called LaSalle Partners back in the day. And that's where you and I met. And I spent several years there in the asset management world, which was a great training ground. I moved from there to Prudential Real Estate Investors. By the mid-90s, I had a defining moment. My father died, and he had been my coach and a friend, and both my parents were just amazing. And they were older parents. They had me when my mom was in her late 30s and my dad in his early 40s. So I lost them when I was in my 30s, but man, I benefited so much from their wisdom as more mature parents. And so with his death, it forced me to really question, what am I doing? Do I love it? It was kind of like something my dad would say, well, what are you doing? And I thought back and I said, I don't love this real estate stuff anymore. And I thought, what have I always loved to do? And I refer to it as having left breadcrumbs for myself. And I thought back to, I'd been a college recruiter, right? Everywhere I worked, I didn't mention this, but for all these different companies I had worked for up until that point, I had volunteered to go on campus as a representative to interview candidates and help them recruit. And so I thought, what would it be like to be a professional executive level recruiter? And I set about doing that. And it took me about a year and a half before I found an opportunity at Spencer Stewart, one of the world's largest executive search firms. And so I joined there in 1997. I was there for 12 years. I became a partner. I led their global diversity practice, worked in their financial officer and financial services practices. And I loved the rigor and the methodology, the systems thinking, the candidate experience, the candidate assessment. I loved the work. But in 2009, I left. Nothing had happened. There was nothing bad. I just had this impulse to write a book. It's something that I had been working on actually for 6 years leading up to that. And the book I did get published, and it's called Career Mapping, Charting Your Course in the New World of Work. And why it was so important to me to get out is because so many people would come to me as an executive recruiter and say, you're going to help me find a job. And I'd say, actually, that's not how this works. I mean, I really wanted to set people's expectations that recruiters don't work for job seekers. We'll chat with you, but we only have a finite inventory of opportunities. And if you're not suitable for any of those, then, you're out of luck. The more I thought about it, I thought people shouldn't be putting all of their eggs in a basket with me or any search firm, because, even if you hit all the search firms that are out there, there are still millions of other opportunities that reside within the hiring organizations. They don't all use search firms. So the book is really walking people through this methodology of thinking about what do you want, really foundational questions that people fail to answer very often before they just say, okay, I'm going to write a resume and send it off to 300 people and see what happens. That's like playing the lottery. And that's not how it works. And so the book is really detailing the elements, and the through line is this key word for me. I say it daily, competencies. And it's really discerning what are those deconstructed elements of what you have done that align with what's required for the role that you want. And it's not about experience. And I was able to do that because I had lived it. I had moved from financial services into professional services. And I talked my way from Prudential into Spencer Stewart. That's what has qualified me. And then I went from getting the book published, doing consulting and coaching for about 4 years, to another search firm. And then in 2016, a friend of mine called and said, hey, he had landed at Google. We had worked together at this other firm. And he said, we need help with our senior leadership hiring. We have an internal executive search firm here at Google, and we need help with regard to diversity. And that's part of my expertise. And I should hasten to say that I consider my expertise to be in executive recruiting, with layering on top of that a specialty around diversity recruiting. I understand the mechanics. This isn't just about knowing where to find underrepresented talent. So I joined Google and was there for 4 years, and I just left in November to do my own thing. So it's been a rich career, and I've seen both the agency side of executive recruiting and the in-house side. And even before that, having done being in financial services and these other various roles.
What a rich tapestry of experiences. You talked about competencies, and short of taking a yellow sheet of paper and drawing a line down the middle of it and putting pluses on one side and minuses on the other side, how should I figure out what my competencies are? And then a follow-up question, once I know that, what should I do with that information?
Yeah. Competencies are behaviors, and these behaviors can be, I'll say, mastered, because there's a whole continuum of skill level, right, that one is hopefully seeking to develop as they go through their career. But it's less about, and this is what I've learned, what I referred to when I made some of my transitions, it was less about experience, because I always tell people, and then they kind of have this aha moment, we all know people who have lots of experience but aren't competent in certain areas. And so, for those companies that like to rely on pedigree, well, I went to this school, I work for these companies, so you need to hire me. I cry foul, because those dynamics have never been proven to be a predictor for one's success. Competencies, however, are a predictor for one's success. So how do you find out what yours are? Look at your performance evaluations. Just think about what is it that you do really well, and get basic. Use basic language for yourself as you're writing it down. Are you organized? How do you communicate? It's asking yourself the how question. As a recruiter, that's typically what I ask candidates, or I'll frame it as, give me an example of a time when, right? How did you build that team? How did you go from, having the concept to actually building out the team and executing on the strategy? How? And competencies fall into a lot of different buckets. And at Google, we had originally a framework that had something like 15 clusters and 60 different competencies. Now, no one expected anyone to have all of them. The whole point is we're trying to get our clients, our hiring managers, to identify what is it that you really want. We're not allowing them to just say, oh, I want somebody who's already done it. Because back to what I said, somebody who's already done it, it doesn't mean that they did it well. And so I'd much rather have someone who doesn't come from the same industry necessarily, but has demonstrated the competencies. For example, let me give an example. One of the big ones at Google is around thriving in ambiguity, building inclusive teams, demonstrated systems thinking. These are kind of simple, but you hear how those things can be applied to any function, whether you're an engineer or a finance person or a marketing person. And that's by design. Because you should be able to, that's what competencies are. You have deconstructed the elements that are the most important and relevant to achieve a series of tasks and responsibilities.
Jenny, you've done hundreds, if not thousands, of telephone screening interviews.
Yeah, thousands.
And if you could tell someone Make certain you do these two things in a telephone interview, and you'll be doing better than 70% of other people that do telephone interviews. What would those two things be that you would tell someone to do?
One is, this is so basic, but it's know what you want. Have a rationale why you want that job. And if you don't have a rationale, then don't do the interview, because I can sniff out motivation. If you're just desperate to get a job, that's not a good motivation, because when something better comes along, you're going to hightail it out of here. So that's one. Know why you want it, because it will show up in the way that you respond, even unconsciously. So that's really important. The second thing is to have a narrative. And I have a podcast, Bob, that it's called Fifth Dimensional Leadership. And I just did a podcast on this, building your career narrative. And by narrative, it used to be sort of the elevator pitch, but I'm talking about something that could be used. You build the foundational narrative from sort of this master resume that is the ugly resume that has everything on it that you've ever done. You need to be customizing both your narrative and your resume for the opportunity. Don't just throw up everything you've done onto a piece of paper or two or three pieces of paper and shove it at me and say, what do you think? Because frankly, I'll come back, and I've said this to people, and say, what do you want me to think? Mm-hmm. Tell me a story. Tell me what I should make from what's here. Connect the dots for me. Tell me the story of how you made the move. Why did you make the move from one place to another? So those are the two things. It's having that narrative and having a rationale for why you want the role.
Jenny, data shows us that men are more often offered jobs because of the charisma and their potential, while women have to prove that they've already done the job. This makes it oftentimes more difficult for women to switch industries, get promoted, gain new skills, on and on. As someone who has lived this world of diversity, give me your thoughts on that.
It's been my experience. There's a double standard. I still see it now. I hope that we can move past it. That's frankly one of the things that I spent a lot of time doing at Google. It wasn't always in the diversity wrapper as much as how are we assessing talent? Just because you know somebody doesn't mean that they're the best for the role. And so relationships and other characteristics like pedigree should not be the basis for hiring. I'm back to that competency thing, because competencies, I didn't say it, but they level the playing field. And so if you're really looking at it, and I had to really double down on the recruiters that I managed at Google to say, are you standing up for some of those candidates that you really believe in? What did you say when the hiring manager said, no, they want to go with the white guy? When in your heart of hearts, you felt strongly that there was another better candidate, male, female, whatever race, whatever sexual orientation, but let's challenge them. It's incumbent upon these recruiters to really challenge these hiring managers to be looking at competencies. So I think that's back to the core of what really matters in this hiring process.
The key takeaway for the candidate is, as we discussed, know your competency and be able to help you as the recruiter see that and connect in terms of those competencies to what the position is, and then your personality, how that fits into the company. That's the key for the candidate.
That is the key. And that's where I think people don't realize that they need to make a decision. They need to be discerning. I mentioned that, I've met somebody once who had applied for 800 jobs. And I thought, oh my God, this person and she was convinced that there was ageism, when in fact she wasn't qualified for 90% of the stuff she applied for, because she treated it like the lottery. When instead, what I could never get her to say was, what do you want? When you have clarity, it can be more than one thing. If you want to be in one or two or three different areas, then laser focus on what are the characteristics and the qualifications, and importantly, the competencies associated with those roles. And then come up with a strategy. Then it becomes, where do I want to live? What kind of companies do I want to work for? And this is how we executed searches. It's like, where am I going to find these people? For the job seeker, it's where am I going to find what I want? And I think a lot of people don't feel entitled to seek what it is that they actually want. Instead, they're trying to fit themselves into something that may or may not be a good fit. But if you are discerning first when you go in, you're increasing the likelihood that you're going to get the job and that you're going to love it and that you're actually well suited for it, because you have done the work to decide what you want.
How do you think a recruiter or a hiring manager reacts when they hear that you've been laid off? And kind of a follow-up to that is that how can that candidate better manage that message that they need to get across about the furlough or layoff?
That's nothing to be embarrassed about. That happens all the time. So I think honesty is the best policy. The layoff could have come from just a reduction in force. It doesn't mean that you're damaged goods. So don't walk around and assume that that's what somebody else is assuming about you. So be honest about it, because keep in mind, a lot of recruiters, depending on the level of the role, will do what we call third-party sourcing or referencing and find that kind of stuff out. So I'd much rather hear it from the candidate with an explanation of why that happened. And you can say, look, I was part of a 1,500 person reduction in force, and it was really disheartening, but I picked myself up and I came up with a plan. So that's the story. The story isn't about the layoff. The story is about what did you do with it? Because that's telling me how clear thinking you are, how you deal with a difficult situation. That's what I'm listening for. So get over the layoff and move on to the story of how you handled it and how do you deal with adversity.
So that damaged goods emotion, when people are laid off, they are embarrassed, they feel guilty, they feel, all of those negative emotions, shame even.
Sure.
How have you helped coach clients of yours, maybe even candidates, to deal with that shame and guilt that they're going through?
Hey, you know what? If it means you get a therapist, if it means you see your rabbi, get help to deal with that stuff, because it's real. Don't sweep it under the rug. Where is it really coming from? Is it coming from you? Is it coming from, some past familial values and morals that said, you don't want to tell your parents because they expected more of you and you're ashamed? That's something that you probably better deal with now and get that handled so that that's not plaguing you for the rest of your career. Because I've dealt with so many different people who have said, I'm fearful of what my next move is. My parents think that I should do X, Y, Z. And it's like, wait a minute, whose life is this? So I think it's really critical for people to deal with the emotional, psychological trauma that can come from that before you start jumping back into the game. Even if it means you meet with somebody, it can be a coach, it can, like I said, it can be a close friend, a mentor, and just come clean and tell them how you're feeling and talk through it and see if you can't get to the bottom of where that possible shame or insecurity is really coming from and get it resolved. Because, as I said, I just think it will follow you around. Even if you have success, it will continue to raise its ugly head.
Jenny, do you think that there's a difference in the recruiting process that I go through? Is there a difference if I am changing jobs? So I'm an HR person and I go to a different company as an HR person versus really reinventing myself. And I'm an HR person and I want to go into tree forestry or something of that nature, right? And if there is, how do you go about the different transition managements between just the changing jobs and really pivoting and being something different?
Again, at the core of it should be, what do you want? Where is your passion? I spoke with somebody when I was at Google who was just seeking some advice, and she was in a sales role. And she said, my mother has MS, and I'm really interested in moving my career in the area of accessibility because technology has really helped my mother with her disabilities. And I said, okay, well, it sounds like you're really passionate about that. So I think you should pursue that at Google and see if Google's a big place and it does have accessibility, areas, pockets in different areas of the company. And I said, but if Google doesn't have it, are you prepared to leave and pursue that elsewhere? And she kind of went, oh, well, I don't know. There's the equity, there's I don't really know. And I said, then you're not committed. If you're committed, then be willing to do what it takes to get into that role. And that passion, that determination is palpable to a hiring manager and a recruiter. So again, this is about you, and have you convinced yourself that this is what you want not just something you should do because it's the next logical thing, or because your parents think that that's the role that you should take, or you're desperate, because those things really become evident, and it's not likely that you're going to be the successful candidate. Instead, if you just say, here's why, just like that woman told me, the fact that her mother has MS and she is passionate about that, accessibility, functionality, and she realized that she has capabilities that she can pull from her time as a salesperson into this different function. She had already thought that through, but she wasn't really willing to pull the cord. She ended up getting a job with Google in accessibility, by the way.
Great story. Jenny, do you think that transition management, moving between jobs, changing careers, do you think that's different today than it was 10, 15 years ago?
Yes, it is. I think it's, in some ways, I hadn't thought about it this way, but when you pose the question, I think in some ways it's easier, because I think there's so much more mobility. People have moved around, and I think companies are getting better at discerning who's good, better, and best based on things other than just have they done it before? Because as I said, having done it before doesn't mean you did it well. So I do think it's easier. And I think, we've got startups, we've got legacy companies. There's so many different ways and places and structures for people to work. I mean, you've got the gig economy, and some people like that because it suits their lifestyle. So in many ways, I think it is easier, with the caveat that the individual is being decisive and discerning and clear-headed about what they want, and importantly, at this point in their lives. And I think it's important to call out that when I'm asking you to sort of draw a line in the sand, it's not forever. I'm an example of someone who did stuff for a long time and then pivoted.
Right.
10 years in commercial real estate, 12 years as executive recruiter, did stuff some time on my own. I mean, you have the right to move. You just have to be thoughtful and be able to tell the story. All of my moves made sense. And not just to me. Someone said to me once, you have kind of a meandering background. I said, no, I don't agree with that. I think you're missing the through line. And let me walk you through what made sense for me then, and what things I pulled from each one of those roles, those jobs that I had, into the next one, and how I made the big shifts into completely different industries and functions. So I think if we understand that we're in the driver's seat, it's so empowering. It's a great way to feel.
Jenny, you talked about your relationship that continues at Kellogg. How do you use those professional organizations, whether they are college and universities or United Way or Rotary or whatever it might be? How do you use those organizations to your advantage when you are transitioning between jobs?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, I would get, and continue to this day, I continue to get periodic inquiries from alumni, and I always try to make time and give a piece of advice. When I lived in Chicago, and I am going to be going back, I was on campus at least once a quarter speaking to a group of students. At one point, I was on the advisory board. And so that network that you build of both current students, alumni, and including your classmates. I was on a call a few months ago since the lockdown with a bunch of people from my class. We were on a Zoom call. I think there were like 40 of us. And it was really delightful to see everybody. And we talked about what we're doing. Now, nothing came out of it, but just to be able to share, here's what I'm doing, so that someone says, hey, you know what? Here's an opportunity. That's the richness. That's what old school we used to call networking, right?
Right.
And you don't network when you need something. You keep yourself out there connecting with people, and you pay it forward. You make yourself available to people to help them when they need it, and they'll be there to help you when you need it. And you are always clear about saying, here's where I'm going, here's what I need. And my dad always said, one of my favorite things that he said, so simple, tell people what you want, because most people actually want to help you. And so when you say, hey, listen, I want to move out of, HR into forestry. Hey, you know what? I know somebody at a timber company. So don't feel shame. Don't feel like you have to hide and have it all together and comparing yourself to other people. I have a young son, young adult. He's 24. And I'm always reminding him, you're on your own journey. And I think you're managing yourself really, really well. He's in the entertainment world, and he's working for a producer director as his personal assistant. And that's an apprenticeship model. I said, your job is to learn and to help him reimagine his work and help him make his work better, in addition to you gaining experience and exposure. So I think that it's that symbiosis between you and the employer, that this isn't just you wanting to get something from them. You have to bring it and help them get better at what it is that they're doing. It cuts both ways.
Jenny, you're going to now give everyone the secret. If you were to tell a friend, this is the number one job hunting tip. If you don't do anything else, do this one. What's that one that you would tell them?
I actually said this to someone today. A former colleague at Google said, hey, I've got a situation and I'd love you to give me some advice. And when we kind of wrapped up, I said, so here's what I think you should do. And this is something I said earlier, but this is how important I think it is the singular most important thing in my mind. Have your narrative. What are you saying? Even before you write your resume or sit across a table from a friend or on a Zoom call with a friend and just talk about what's on there. Just talk. We can be really clumsy. It doesn't matter. You're not trying to get perfect language. But so few people have really thought about this. And when I was leading Google's internal mobility efforts with their senior leaders, I discovered that a lot of these very senior, very accomplished individuals couldn't really describe how they did what they did and what they wanted to do going forward. I want to solve big problems. No, more. That's crazy. No. And so we would go back and dissect, what are the competencies that you really amassed in some of your past roles and how might you want to apply them? And you're doing this in a vacuum. By that, I mean, you don't have to have a job in mind necessarily. You get to dream for a minute. And then when you begin to speak that, now you hear yourself, there's almost like a gestalt element to this. You hear yourself saying what it is that you actually want. And so that's where I think people don't realize the agency that they have in charting their course, to shamelessly plug my book. But that to me is the magic. It's being able to speak what it is that you want, how you've done what you've done, why you did those things, where you see yourself going, what makes you a great candidate for this role in the language of competencies. Now this is going to be a robust interview and a robust conversation, because it's the foundation for, I would always ask candidates at the beginning of the interview, tell me about yourself. And it was fascinating how many people got flustered. And I'd say, give me 10 minutes. And a lot of people would just read from their resume. And that's not what I asked. I wanted to know what else was on, what wasn't on there.
Right.
I'm looking for the story. And so when you master your story, there's a good chance that you are getting in touch with yourself in ways that I don't think people realize that they needed to.
I like that, master your story. That's a great line.
Yeah.
Jenny, any books or other resources that you would recommend to someone that is going through a transition?
Other than mine? There are so many books out there, and I think you can overdo it on getting advice. And I think you if you just sit down and do some of this work, sit with yourself before you go out and start applying to a bunch of stuff, get some clarity, think it through, talk to some friends, but most importantly, be still with you and say, who am I at this stage of my career? If you're 25, you're going to be really different at 35, really different at 45, and really different at 55. So be who you are now and allow yourself to dream and see where that's going to take you. So I think that's the kind of the best advice I can give. And don't overdo it on the resources, but leverage your network, have your narrative down, speak it to your network, and allow things to start coming to you. When you have that clarity, you begin to be like a magnet and you attract these opportunities to you versus chasing after something, believing that you have to prove yourself. You need to be as discerning about the opportunity that you're pursuing as the employer is about you. Is this the right job for you, given where you want to be? You need to decide that, and don't come at it from a position of scarcity. Like, this is the only thing I have. I need to put food on the table. And that can be real for people. And if you get it, then that's fine. Then, get paid and put food on the table. But start thinking longer term about, now what do you want? Now that you can feed yourself and the family, what else are you going to want? And how are you going to leverage where you are to get you to that next place?
So if our listeners only remember 3 key points from today's episode as they go through transition, what are those 3 things that you want them to take away that you think will help them be successful?
It's begin to understand and articulate your competencies. And again, competencies are not the same as experience. Some people have innate competencies, others learn them by virtue of their experiences. And you gain more and more, right? So they're portable. You keep taking them with you. So understand your competencies. That's 1. The other one is building that narrative. That's 2. And then the third one is really just believing in yourself and being willing to own your decision and claim your future and don't feel as though you're a victim.
Ginny Clarke, that was great advice. No wonder over the years I've turned to you for support and mentorship and coaching. I know that you gave our listeners a lot of value today. Thank you for caring enough and being willing to share with them. I'm just so excited in terms of the knowledge nuggets that you shared today. Thank you, Ginny Clarke. I appreciate it.
Bob, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.